Hi, my name is Scott, the Miniature Maniac. In today's video, we're bullying some of my viewers with the big old CNC. But you know who's not a bully? A sponsor for today's video, and that's Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website and run your business. What up, Mini family? A quick disclaimer. The feedback that I give to these painters is based on what I think makes a miniature look good. What you think makes a model look good might be different, and that's okay. In fact, the difference that you and I have in what makes a model look good is what makes art interesting. All right, let's get on with it with number one. Let's pull out the monitor here. I want to get some high def images. All right, this is a Reaper Dragon on what I think is a dice tower. And despite this model being very large, its base is even larger. But I think probably the biggest point of feedback that I'd give to this person is that there's just too much going on in terms of color. Not only is there teal and magenta and green grass on the model itself, but there's like oranges, more magentas, blues, and greens on the base. The color scheme is very confused, and to even further that, the background does not help at all with the photo. I think some more careful planning about what colors you're going to use on the model itself would have been good here. My point of feedback for this model is that the photo needs to be better. I think it was Ben Cantor who said to Vince Venturella in an interview on his channel was that the picture of the model is more the product than the actual model itself. More people are going to see the photo than will see the real Mini. There's tons of weird blurriness going on in the model, and it's kind of hard to see what's going on. But to give some actual feedback, the TMM doesn't look very shiny at all. What I'm going to guess is you put a matte varnish over it or some kind of finish, and that kind of killed its luster. You got to be careful with TMM and varnishes to not do that. It could also have been a wash you applied to the model itself, and that would also kind of kill some of that shine. Furthermore, the ale on the bar there does not look like ale. It looks like opaque yellow liquid. I think if beer were to spill on a bar, it would just stain it and make it look darker because it's kind of a transparent liquid. Worth thinking about. Okay, this model looks fantastic. The white's really well done. It's a nice, tasteful amount of weathering. But I think the biggest problem is the model's face. You have these incredibly sharp and very angular edge highlights amidst all this very dark midtone and incredibly dark shadow. I don't see a whole lot of what is going on with the face. And that's kind of the first place that I look. I think to improve this model's face, maybe less angularity with the highlights, less straight lines. The human face, while this one might have strong features, doesn't have as strong of features as, say, like his shoulder pad or things like that that are very harsh. Filling out some of that shadow area with more midtone and softening some of those highlights would make this model look better, give it better curb appeal, I would say. All right, the first thing I see with this model is that it is uniformly glossed, like almost too glossy. Like this level of gloss is what I would use for like gems and eye lenses and scopes and things like that. And it's all over the model. It looks like it's kind of been drenched in a rainstorm, but it's like almost like perfectly so. One point of feedback people always give about miniature painting is contrast, and that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean contrast of finish, it can mean contrast of texture, it can mean contrast of color or hue, it can mean contrast of lightness and darkness, and in this case, we need more contrast of finish. The whole thing is the exact same finish. I have a video all about texture and finish that you can watch that I've linked down in the description and also up in the eye right there to kind of learn more about how we can use finish to really emphasize material and also color and all kinds of things. All right, I think the biggest point of feedback for this Dark Angel Terminator here is that the highlight for the green has kind of taken over what I think the midtone should be. Dark Angels are typically pretty dark, as the name suggests, and I think I can see the highlight was applied with an airbrush because I can see very fine grain all over the model. And this is very typical for an airbrush. If your last step is applying a highlight, typically the highlight will run a little rampant and kind of take over what your implied color was supposed to be. So I think a way to fix this is the last step with an airbrush could be applying your midtone or a midtone with a shadow in it to kind of reintroduce that color, get rid of some of that pale highlight, get some more vibrancy back into your armor. Really nice freehand though. All right, these first 3 models just scream for some kind of definition, whether that's applying a wash or whether that's doing recessed shading with like an enamel panel liner or like just painting it in with an acrylic paint. But what it seems like is you have a lot of nice base coats that are really vibrant and really nicely placed, but you need separation between those details. That was one thing that studying a lot of GW painting taught me, was that between every single detail on the model, there is some kind of separation, and that it helps viewers read what's going on with the model, so that these models need a little bit of that separation. Okay, I don't do a whole lot of heavily weathered stuff, so I might not be the best person to ask for this, but maybe a way you could improve this paint job is with a little bit more variety. Maybe the mud on the tank treads could have something like some tiny little bits of grass tuft, or maybe like a human hand, or like maybe like a little bit of bullet casings or something like that. And maybe in the armor itself, you could see like denting from like bullet holes or something like that. All I see is a lot of scratching and streaking, but I don't see any specific bullet holes. Also, as another way to add a little bit of variety to the color palette itself, you have a lot of greens and browns and creams going on. You could add a little bit of orange and red-orange rust to some of the steel parts. You don't have to go crazy with it, but a very small and tasteful amount will help to kind of add some diversity to the paint scheme you have going on here. But if you add too much, it might look a little bit gaudy, so you gotta be careful of that. And now for a word from our sponsor.
I don't have a personal gallery for my miniature painting art, so when Squarespace reached out to me to sponsor a video, I took this as an opportunity to use their platform to build a dedicated gallery for myself. A gallery like this is useful for a number of reasons. For those who don't know what miniature painting is, I'm looking at you, Aunt Amy. This shows them in a succinct, beautiful way. Importing images and dealing with alignment is made easy, and all the while creating a website that just looks awesome. It's important that your galleries show your work while also being functional and beautiful itself. If I need to see a bigger resolution of this miniature so I can see the creamy blends, it's as simple as double clicking. If you want to save some fat stacks on making a miniature art gallery for yourself, head to squarespace.com/Miniac to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain using the code Miniac at checkout.
Holy moly, that was a great ad. Now, back to the feedback. Okay, I think one problem with this bust is an issue of intentionality. I think a lot of miniature painters, myself included, will try to replicate some effect in real life, and it won't look exactly like what's going on, and it'll just end up being a little bit confusing. And in this case, I'm looking at these black patches on this model's face. It looks like a wash was applied and then kind of wiped away a little bit, and what I'm assuming it's supposed to look like is like oil stains and soot from like working in a garage and things like that, but it ends up not looking like that. And to kind of further complicate things, there are these like yellow lines under her eyes, and I don't know what that would be. I see maybe freckles or maybe like dirt, more dirt that's kind of been stippled on. So there's a lot of possibly cool effects going on here with the face, but I don't exactly know what they are, and I end up just being left confused. Furthermore, with the goggles, I guess we kind of see that we're seeing some very stark reflections and shadows in kind of like the glass goggles, but also there's like this really bright, almost lightning bolt looking thing. And again, I don't know what that is. So I think being honest with yourself about when something is working and when it's not working, and maybe redoing it or trying a different approach is really important. And in this case, I think it might have been good for trying to redo the oil on the face or what was going on with the goggles and stuff like that. Okay, I picked this model to give feedback to because I'm seeing a problem that I see on a lot of models, that I saw on a lot of stuff that I painted. And I can tell with the face, you applied a base coat, and then you applied a wash, and then you started to apply more highlights. And the problem that I'm seeing can be illustrated with his cheek on his right side. Too much of the wash has been left around. The upper parts of the cheek should have almost nearly the maximum highlight on them because they kind of stick out from the face. When we put down a wash and then we start to apply a highlight on top of it, the darkness of the wash can kind of scare us in terms of like how much of the highlight we should be applying. And then what often happens is we start to only stick to like the edges and things like that, leaving faces really dark. Like one of the faces we saw actually earlier in this video. So what I'll say is be more bold about how you apply your highlights after you've done your washing. In fact, maybe you can even change up the order and start with a midtone and then apply lines with acrylic paint to the deepest recesses and then apply highlights from there. When the whole face is this dark washed thing, it can be really confusing on where to apply highlights exactly. But if we start with maybe a thinner wash that's applied with just normal acrylic paint into very specific spots, then maybe it's kind of easier to figure out where the highlights should go. Some quick photo feedback. The background of your photo is brighter than the foreground of your photo, and this can happen when you're doing cell phone photography, and it tries to expose for the whole image, and in this case, the whole image is fairly bright, but the most important thing isn't that bright, so it ended up being darker when the auto exposure happened. But from what I can see, there's a lot of red and orange on this model. The base, the armor, the tufts on top of the head, it's all this warm palette. And what ends up happening is I can't really distinguish exactly what's going on. So when you're picking colors for a paint scheme, in my personal opinion, you want to vary the colors without being gaudy. And the way one does that is, say, pick a main color or two main colors, like in this case, red could be your main color. And then you introduce other colors that maybe cover the same amount of area on the model, but aren't as vibrant. They don't take up as much visual space because they aren't as attention pulling. So maybe some other parts, like say his loincloth in the middle could have been a brown or a tan that had purple in it or something else, but mostly desaturated tones as not to take away from the red and also just be more visually confusing. So yeah, too much warm tones that are all vibrant and all kind of shouting at me on this model, I think. Okay, the main reason I picked this model, specifically the picture of its back, was because we can see something about zenithal lighting. On her thigh, we can see how it goes from bright to dark, and also on the calf, it goes from bright to dark. But we think about how light would actually hit this model. In fact, you can even see it reflecting off of these semi-satin paints, is that it wouldn't work this way. The bottom of her calf actually flares out, so there would be a highlight toward the bottom, and the shadow would kind of be more in the midsection where the scoop is. Furthermore, on the thigh, it wouldn't just go straight up from bright to dark. The darkness would be on the inside of the thigh, the part that's kind of closer to the robe, and the whole thigh along the outer side would have a highlight, and it would start to get darker toward the inside, more like that. Less like just bright from top to bottom. This is a super awesome bust, and I really like the texture you're going for and also the OSL effect. But one thing that we can't forget about OSL is that it's two things. It's color, but it's also light. If we take this model and looking at his face and we turn it into a grayscale image, the OSL just completely dissolves. So when we're picking an OSL subject, it's important to paint it and place shadows in such a way that our OSL also illuminates part of the model with like fake highlights and shadows, as opposed to just exclusively being color. When you're going for a subject that is very heavily OSLified, like OSL is a big part of your paint scheme, kind of thinking about where you're going to place your highlights and shadows and thinking about what kind of lighting situation this guy is in is going to help further emphasize the OSL effect. So for instance, this guy was kind of in like a moonlit street. Maybe the majority of the highlight would be gone on top of his forehead and under his eyes, and most of the light would be under his cheeks and things like that, being lit from whatever the source is in this case. That's worth thinking about when you have an OSL subject like this that's so important. Oh, a chibi! I love chibis. No, I hate chibis. But I love vampires, so this is all good. I think with chibis, the thing about them is that you have such increased surface area to work that you want to put extra effort into the parts that are large. So in this case, it's the head. So with the eyes, all I see is black and then a very dark red added to the eyes. But we could have gone a lot crazier with the eyes. We could have started at black, then a deep magenta, and then a red, and then orange, and then a yellow. We could have added pupils. We could have added veins. We could have added, all kinds of different things that you might see in typical eyes, just because you have so much area to work when compared with a normal miniature. So when painting a chibi, or when painting a bust, or any kind of larger scale miniature, take advantage of the increased surface area you have. Okay, we got kind of an anime-inspired diorama here, and the reason I picked this to give feedback to was because the plinth itself, with the surface the model is on, the little terrain, is so gigantic in comparison to the model itself that the model is kind of almost lost in what is going on. Like, obviously it's not actually lost. This is a black model on kind of like a brownish, greenish little turf here, but it's just so big in comparison that it's just kind of hard to justify the size. If this plinth was smaller and the terrain elements were kind of more condensed, it would give more emphasis to the model itself. It'd make the diorama look cooler because there'd be more going on in a smaller area and stuff like that. So yeah, consider when you're making a plinth for a display model, ask the question, how small can I get away with to fit all the features I want to put on this base, and then make it that big. Okay, it's time. It's time to break out the only feedback people on the internet know how to give. This model needs some contrast. Most notably, it needs contrast in the flesh. I see maybe like 2 skin tones used, and they're very close in luminance, i.e. the value or the brightness of the color. The face itself is almost totally flat. It needs way more contrast. For the face itself, you would see shadows maybe under her brows, you'd see them in the cheeks, you'd see them under the chin, you would see them under the bottom lip, but not the main chin, just under the bottom lip. You would see them maybe along the nose and things like that. And this helps to really define what's going on. But yeah, it needs contrast everywhere, in the white of the stockings and the purple of the dress, and also in the skin tone. I can see that there is some. Obviously there is some, but it just needs more of it. You need more depth of shadow, which I know can be kind of a scary thing to add to skin tone, because skin tone's kind of light and things can get kind of chalky, but you know, it needs it. Sometimes you paint a model and try to do contrast like I did with this succubus, and it looks like a total clown, but you know, you have to kind of fail before you succeed when you're trying to improve. So yeah, just need some more contrast. You'll be good to go, Connor. Connor from Scotland. All right, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. If I didn't get to your miniature, I'm sorry. Hopefully, a lot of the feedback that I gave was helpful to you as well. I tried not to do a lot of repeat advice across multiple miniatures, so there was a nice diversity of feedback. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you like the channel and you want to support it, there are many ways that you can do that. All things linked in the description below. Most notably, a Patreon campaign that includes fun things like a Discord server where we hang out and chat about all kinds of things, including miniature painting, but also like, I don't know, the best way to cook a steak. I also give feedback on the Discord to a lot of patrons, and I also give them shout outs. We're gonna do a shout out session right now. Much love goes to Tomas, Shapansky, Daniel, Marcia, I am Alfarius, Agnostic Friar, Mackenzie Phillips, Tim Frankie, Sam Thompson, and Jacob Tishanor. Thank you guys for supporting me on Patreon and allowing me to do what I do here on YouTube. All right, let's wrap this up. Subscribe or die! But most importantly, don't forget to paint my Miniac!